Welcome to Your Soul Rising. In this video, I lecture through Iain McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. It is the book on this subject, covering neuroscience and its impact on all aspects of our culture and society. Before we start, subscribe to the channel if you're new. It may be free, but your subscription helps this channel and everyone watching to learn and grow together. Now, let's dive in to The Master and His Emissary. At the heart of the book lies a profound and urgent question. How has the structure of the human brain shaped the course of Western civilization? By this, I don't mean to imply that the brain generates consciousness, as in physicalism. McGilchrist's insights here fit neatly into all of the major ontologies and are highly relevant to many of the crises facing the West today. So whatever is the relationship between the brain and consciousness, and I personally don't believe it's the physicalist picture, by the way, the hemispheric differences certainly correlate with our minds and with the ways in which we construct society. More deeply, we should ask what happens when one way of knowing the world comes to dominate at the expense of the other. With extraordinary scope, philosophical depth, and neuroscientific rigor, McGilchrist undertakes a journey through the architecture of the brain. It is a biological organ, yes, but also the physical symbol for the divided nature of human understanding. His thesis is deceptively simple, yet immensely far-reaching. The left and right hemispheres of the brain attend to the world in fundamentally different ways, and the dominance of the left hemisphere's mode of attention over the right has brought us to a crisis point in the modern West. A crisis of meaning, of relationship, indeed of being itself. I have found that this book is relevant to every question I could ever ask, because of course, all of those questions are only ever asked by, in, and through consciousness. Thus, McGilchrist's work touches every aspect of life. The book is divided into two major parts. The first half lays the groundwork by exploring the neuroscience of the brain's hemispheric differences. It's important to say that McGilchrist distances himself from pop psychology caricatures of the left brain being logical and the right brain being creative. Instead, he presents a far more nuanced picture grounded in empirical research and clinical observation. The left and right hemispheres are not differentiated by what they do, since nearly all cognitive tasks involve both hemispheres, but how they do it, how they attend to the world, how they process information, and what they value. The right hemisphere, he argues, is the primary mode of experience. It takes in the world as a whole, attending to the broad context, the lived and embodied reality of things, and the interconnectedness of experience. It is the hemisphere of metaphor, music, emotion, empathy, and presence. It does not abstract the world, it dwells in it. It sees the other as like the self, with its own interiority and agency, and as the self, being part of the same unity of reality. It grasps implicit meaning, nuance, and the irreducibility of phenomena to neat categories. The right hemisphere is the master, the one who first encounters the world, who stands open to it in a posture of receptivity. The left hemisphere, by contrast, is the emissary, a brilliant and necessary servant who takes the contents of experience and analyzes, categorizes, manipulates, and re-presents them. It works with maps, not with terrain. It breaks wholes into parts, makes judgments, names, counts, and sequences. It excels in systems, abstractions, and control. The left hemisphere is essential, but it is inherently dependent on what the right provides it. It sees the world through a narrow lens, focused and grasping, attempting to pin down the flux of reality into fixed forms. Whereas the right hemisphere engages with the living presence of a tree, or the tree as essence, if you will, the left works with the idea of tree, as an object or concept within a defined taxonomy. The emissary is not evil, but when it forgets its role and attempts to usurp the position of the master, imbalance and pathology follow. In other words, it is less like a devil and more like the demiurge of Gnostic myth, ignorant rather than inherently bad, capable of great and positive achievements, but only if it remembers that it is a servant and not God. The normal flow looks like this. The right hemisphere takes in the whole of experience as reality presences itself to us. Then the left hemisphere engages by analyzing, categorizing, dividing, and manipulating that experience. Finally, the right hemisphere takes those details and reintegrates them into a now enriched, holistic picture. In this way, it is the left serving the right. Importantly, the right hemisphere can perform all of the functions of the left, just not as efficiently or capably. Meanwhile, the left hemisphere cannot perform the functions of the right. Indeed, it does not even understand the right hemispheric worldview, and the left's personality is such that it seeks to erase from existence anything that it cannot grasp and control. As McGilchrist points out, this manifests in the drawings of patients who have right hemispheric damage. When asked to duplicate the image of a flower, these individuals will create only half of a flower, the half that is under the left hemisphere's purview. It denies the existence of the other half. By contrast, patients with left hemispheric damage draw a complete flower, but it lacks detail compared to someone with no brain damage at all. The result is that the left hemisphere, when left unchecked by the right hemisphere, is actually psychotic. It seeks to completely take over, no longer content to be the servant. Like the demiurge, it creates a fallen shadow reality by interpreting the world according to its image rather than engaging with the holistic, truer picture of the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is ignorant of that truth because it simply cannot grasp it without the help of its master. As such, the worldview of the left hemisphere is atomistic, meaningless, abstracted, illusory, accidental, a determined series of cause and effect chance events, utilitarian, clean-lined, flat line rather than harmonious, and lacking nuance, holism, logic and reason, and empathy. But let's emphasize that logic and reason piece, because despite being associated with logic in pop psychology, the left hemispheric worldview actually precludes and defies logical coherence. This tyranny of the left hemisphere, McGilchrist suggests, is precisely what has occurred in the development of the modern West. The second part of his book is a sweeping intellectual history of Western civilization, tracing how the balance between hemispheres has shifted over time. In ancient Greece, for example, we find a delicate harmony. The pre-Socratic philosophers, such as Heraclitus and Parmenides, exhibit a right hemispheric openness to paradox and unity. Plato and Aristotle embody the tension between the intuitive grasp of the good and the systematic analysis of being. Greek sculpture, drama, and metaphysics all reveal a reverence for wholeness, proportion, and mystery, even as rational systems emerge. The interior life is prioritized over the material, and the direct experience of reality is privileged over abstract systems and theories. For the theories we do see, they are a balance between intellectual abstraction and practical, intuitive embodiment through application. Philosophy, in other words, was meant to be lived. With the rise of Rome, we begin to see a shift toward left hemispheric values: order, law, empire, and engineering. After the fall of Rome, however, medieval scholasticism again achieves a kind of balance. We see, for example, in many of the Church Fathers, a mix of mysticism and philosophy applied to Christian theology. We see in their work the pattern that the brain is supposed to follow, the rigorous system of thought that underlies the orthodox spiritual path of theosis supports the spiritual seeker's lived, directly experienced internal journey toward God, in which the whole of reality comes to be viewed as a divine communication and expression. This, as opposed to the left hemisphere usurping that holistic journey and redefining religion to be purely propositional, physically literalist, and abstract or theoretical. More on this in a moment. But first, those same values, the right hemispheric values, were enhanced in the Renaissance, which saw a resurgence of the right hemispheric engagement with reality. It is no surprise that this era of history gave us some of the most prized, complex, and layered forms of art. As well, great religious and philosophical works emerged at this time that synthesized many of the most archetypically pregnant worldviews, including the Greek classics, Hermetism, and Christianity. In true right hemispheric fashion, Renaissance thinkers prioritized the connections and convergence points between these views, rather than dividing them up along abstract, theoretical differences and seeking exclusivity and the inerrancy of a single view. But it is with the Enlightenment that the emissary makes its boldest bid for supremacy. And indeed, it has succeeded. The rationalism of Descartes, the empiricism of Locke and Hume, the mathematization of reality through Newtonian physics. All of these usher in a worldview that privileges abstraction, control, and mechanism over lived experience, presence, and soul. The world becomes increasingly disenchanted. Nature is no longer a living organism to be communed with, but a machine to be dissected and mastered. Even in religion, the world becomes not an expression of the divine, but a separate creation of meaningless stuff. The soul is not seen as communing with God when contemplating the beauty and harmony of nature, but rather as a separate spiritual substance trapped within the inherently evil physical substance. This is not the philosophy or theology of the Church Fathers, and yet all forms of Christianity have adopted it. Arguably, first with Protestantism, since the Reformation coincided with the rise of modernity. However, Catholicism had completely followed suit by the time of Vatican II. Orthodox theology, being still connected to the Eastern tradition and thus more immune to Western modernity, has fared better, although it is still facing this challenge today. Other disciplines, like Quakerism, escaped by prioritizing direct experience of the divine over hierarchies, authorities, and even scripture, all of which have been co-opted in modernity to push an atomistic substance ontology not so dissimilar from the left hemispheric worldview of the atheist. Direct experience of God through introspection is the last safe bastion, as it is purely right hemispheric, and thus the left hemisphere cannot touch it. Meanwhile, we see other denominations prioritizing the having of intellectual propositional statements over the being connected to God. We see slide decks in churches rather than ceremony, liturgy, and symbolism. We see scriptural interpretations reduced to the levels of physical and historical literalism, missing completely the layers of archetypal and symbolic depth that, through the physical events of the narratives, actually tell us about the spiritual journey of humanity's consciousness. That is the value of sacred texts for theosis, not the having of intellectual positions, dogmas, or beliefs abstracted away from lived experience. To return to the history, the left hemispheric triumph continues into the Industrial Revolution, modern capitalism, and the rise of bureaucratic systems. The world becomes increasingly defined by its utility rather than its meaning. Indeed, we can look at epistemology, the branch of philosophy that justifies claims and asks what it means to know something. At this time, epistemology changes its standards from truth value to the pragmatist idea of practical utility. Of course, judgments of utility still require truth, but the left hemispheric attitude ignores that fact, which would, after all, require a holistic ontological picture grounded in consciousness, not an atomistic, mechanical one based on the physical order alone. Language at this time becomes more literal. Metaphor is increasingly discarded, and intuition is viewed with suspicion. Education becomes technocratic, art becomes ironic or disembodied, and human beings are treated as units in systems, economic, political, informational. Even consciousness itself, in some strands of cognitive science, is reduced to computation or neural processing at best, and is erased completely at worst. See the views of illusionism and eliminativism. We live, McGilchrist suggests, in a civilization increasingly structured by the values of the left hemisphere: fragmentation, reification, and instrumentalization. What we have lost is not merely a way of thinking, he argues, but a way of being. The right hemisphere is not merely poetic, it is attuned to the sacred, to the ineffable, to the embodied and the intersubjective. It is through the right hemisphere that we encounter beauty, truth, and God, not as logical propositions, but as presences that call forth awe and transformation. Here we find the beauty and the infinite intelligibility of reality through a reciprocal opening between us and God, reality, and nature in dialogical fashion. But the dominance of the left hemisphere leads to what McGilchrist calls a hall of mirrors, a world in which symbols no longer point beyond themselves, but merely reflect back their own abstraction. In such a world, relationships are replaced by transactions, knowledge by simple data, wisdom by intellectual cleverness. We are drowning in data, but starving for meaning. Crucially, McGilchrist does not propose a rejection of the left hemisphere. After all, it's incredibly helpful when it serves its proper role. Rather, he calls for a restoration of balance, a re-hierarchization in which the right hemisphere once again takes the lead. The left hemisphere must serve, not dominate. Just as in the title parable drawn from Nietzsche, the emissary who forgets his master's wisdom ultimately brings ruin. A healthy culture, like a healthy mind, must integrate both modes of knowing, but it must remember that the world is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The ignorant demiurge must become enlightened, awakening to the reality of a higher power beyond itself. Throughout The Master and His Emissary, McGilchrist draws from a vast range of disciplines: neurology, psychiatry, philosophy, art, literature, theology, and history. The man truly fits the definition of a polymath, a Renaissance man. He weaves together the empirical and the intuitive, the scientific and the poetic, in a style that itself reflects the right hemispheric mode he champions. His account of brain lateralization is not reductionist, it's holistic. It's not deterministic, it is suggestive of deep patterns that unfold across time and culture. For example, he points to brutalist architecture, replacing the classically beautiful schools of old. The transformation of music from harmonic, complex, and resonant to flat and rhythmic. The shift from landscapes, portraits, and scenes with layers of depth to the abstraction of modern art. And to the quantization of humanities, like philosophy, which now sees symbolic logic and mathematics in vogue, and the elimination from curricula of epistemology and ontology, or metaphysics. The issue is not that these new forms are bad. Certainly there is much to appreciate about them. However, that appreciation is a right hemispheric attitude, whereas the left hemisphere would see the old schools erased from existence and totally replaced by its version of these disciplines. Indeed, McGilchrist suggests that the very disorders of our age, the alienation, environmental degradation, nihilism, polarization, the erosion of shared meaning, these are symptomatic of this hemispheric imbalance. When the world is seen only through the left hemisphere's lens, even our solutions become part of the problem. We double down on control, on surveillance, on algorithmic prediction, never asking whether the problem lies in the very frame through which we're viewing reality. The left hemisphere seeks to erase the right hemispheric influence on the world completely. Remember the example of the flower drawing. Thus, we see its negative impact across all aspects of civilization. The demiurge is creating its fallen world, and trapping the soul within, since eventually the right hemisphere will not recognize itself in the reality it observes. The left hemispheric illusion will seem complete and therefore self-reinforcing, unless we can break out of it through knowledge of our true self and of the truth of reality. This, I suggest, is the gnosis of our time. To restore wholeness, we must learn to attend differently, to step back into the presence and flow of the right hemisphere, which does not seek to dominate, but to participate. By the way, I'm not an ontological Gnostic, but I do find that as a system, it is excellent for symbolically personifying mental complexes and aspects of our minds, such that we can better engage with them. And of course, it seems thematically resonant with people today, which probably accounts for why Gnosticism is gaining in popularity once again. In the closing reflections of the book, McGilchrist offers not a program, not a theory, but a possibility to put into practice. That through attention and humility and a reawakening of the poetic imagination, we might begin to repair the split. The path forward is not found in further abstraction, but in the rediscovery of the world as something alive and relational and sacred. To live wisely is to allow the Master to return, not to abolish the emissary, but to guide him. Only then can we hope to build civilization that honors the fullness of what it means to be human. The Master and His Emissary is, in the end, not merely a book about the brain. It is a mirror held up to us, revealing how deeply the structures of mind shape the structures of culture. It invites us, with clarity and grace, to imagine a new wholeness. It is a work of great power and spiritual insight. Its message is one we cannot afford to ignore, for if the emissary remains in charge, we risk losing not only our way of life, but the very soul that gives life its meaning. So I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It is quite an ambitious read, but I hope this video helps your journey through it if you decide to give it a go. Thank you for joining me. Subscribe if you're new here, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.